Good evening, everybody out there in YouTube land. Hope you're having a good day. It's late in the evening here in Kunshan, China, and I just thought I would pop on to my channel just to talk about this project that I did over a year ago. It was actually the first YouTube music project that I did starting in the fall of 2024. I was inspired by this Beatles book with my name on it because I sometimes share it with my students. This is a songbook containing all the songs the Beatles ever wrote, and it's very easy to use if you play guitar or piano. It just gives you the chords, it gives you the lyrics. Usually it's all on one page, so you can easily just go through all the songs one by one. So, when I got this book, that inspired me, hey, why don't I just go through all the songs? And it sounded kind of crazy at the time because there's close to 200 Beatles songs in this book. But I thought to myself, well, I probably know a third of them already in terms of I've probably at one point or another played them on piano or played them on guitar. I certainly know all the songs in terms of, how to sing them. I know the melodies. I've been listening to the Beatles since I was a little kid. And so all those songs are embedded in my head, even the more obscure ones. And as you can tell, because I'm a fan of the White Album, I posted a video about arguing that the White Album was their best album, which, there's always a lot of pushback to that, but everybody has their favorites. Anyway, so I went through this book methodically, alphabetically, and I recorded myself because I like to do that as a practice. I like to record myself playing a song, and then I can go back and listen to it and see how smooth it was, and are there any things that I need to work on. It's just a good practice, I think, if you're a musician, and especially if you like to perform for other people. It's good to record yourself on a regular basis. So I was already in the habit of doing that, and it was just one step further to say, hey, I'll just post these on YouTube and see what happens. And I guess there was part of me was saying, hey, maybe people will be impressed that that some guy recorded all the Beatles songs. But turns out I don't think that there was a big fervor. I did get some likes, and some of the songs got a lot of attention. I was surprised by how many hits and likes some of the songs got. But most of them kind of sank into YouTube oblivion, which is probably where they belong. I mean, this wasn't a bid for any kind of recognition. It's more a practice, as I said, that I've developed as a musician, and I thought that putting them on YouTube would at least allow me the chance to build up an archive, and I could always go back in a very convenient way and listen to songs that I had recorded. Oh, okay, I played it that way. I played the guitar that way. I sang it that way. So I think it makes a good reference if you're a musician, especially if you want to go back and perform those songs again. It's always good to keep a record of how you played it in the past. So I think it was a great kind of an experiment, but also a very worthwhile project for me. It really gave me a deep dive into this band that I've known and loved all my life. There were a lot of fun surprises, a lot of songs that I had to really work at getting the chord changes, adding in little riffs and licks, and even adding some stuff on my melodica. I played a few songs on piano, but almost all of them were on guitar. And I don't count myself like a really super accomplished guitar player. I've always been kind of a guy who likes to play guitar to accompany singing. whether it's my singing or other people's singing. So I'm by no means like a flashy or virtuosic guitar player. So it was a challenge for me to get some of those little licks and riffs going in the song. But mostly I was just playing to back up my singing. And I would add harmonies sometimes, not to all the songs, but sometimes when I felt inspired, I would layer a harmony or two on the song, especially if it was one of those Beatles songs where you just can't, hard to imagine it without the harmonies. And then for the little solo parts, I would just use a melodica to kind of, make it a little more interesting. So it was a fun project, and I think, the big takeaway was, and I've said this before, I think on previous, whatever we call these video podcasts. The big takeaway was that every Beatles song has some kind of unique fingerprint to it. They were obviously drawing from a wide repertoire of popular music from jazz in the 20s and 30s, which I think Paul was especially fond of, to the early rock and roll of the 1950s, to some folk music, maybe going back centuries, R&B, the so-called girl groups that were popular in America, blues, obviously, and they drew a lot from the classical repertoire as well, especially with the influence of George Martin and the use of all those classical instruments in so many of their songs. So I think, for me, the Beatles had always been kind of a gateway into modern music, and I learned so much about different musical styles and genres just by listening to the Beatles over the years, and then I would get into those styles. So going back to, just going through all their entire output of songs in the span of like 2 or 3 months, it really made me realize how what a unique stamp they were able to put on each song, just little twists, little turns. I kind of knew about this because I'd been listening to them intently, and I'd read a lot about the Beatles. But just replicating each song and going through that process really brought it home how unique their songwriting was. They were always taking in influences from different genres, like I said, but they would put their own little unique stamp on each song. And I think the only other musician I think who comes close in that regard, although he's considered more of a lyricist, perhaps than a composer, is Bob Dylan. I think he's underrated as a composer, and that's another project that I'm doing now, is going through all of Bob Dylan's albums one by one and recording my versions of his songs. I think there's a lot of actually similarity between Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and a lot of cross-fertilization, and that's a subject that really needs more exploration. I wish there was a book about Bob Dylan and the Beatles. Maybe there is, and I don't know about it, but I haven't seen one. But anyway, I think in terms of the lyrics themselves, yeah, the Beatles definitely were imaginative. They were, there's a lot of wordplay in their lyrics. There are a lot of wonderful aspects to their lyrics. But I think it's really, what it comes down to is the music itself and the compositions. That was what made the Beatles so special. The lyrics were okay. They got better over time, especially after the influence of Bob Dylan on the Beatles, and maybe some other music of that age got them to be more introspective, more imaginative, less lovey-dovey than they had been in the early stages of their career. But I don't think that they were necessarily great poets. There are some songs that achieve a certain level of poetry. I think, songs like Blackbird and Julia on the White Album. Some of John's more imaginative songs like I Am the Walrus or Happiness is a Warm Gun with kind of surreal imagery. Definitely not up to the level of Bob Dylan or even, Leonard Cohen is kind of a different story, but I don't think that they had the poetic skills of those artists. But it was the combination of the words and the music and the way they brought the music together. And I think the other thing that it showed me going through the Beatles output song by song, just with me singing and with the guitar, the other thing that it really brought home is that just about any of those songs that they wrote, no matter how fancy they got with their production, with all of the musical components, all of the sound components, all of the harmonies, almost all of them you can just strip down to a singer with an acoustic guitar. I mean, there's a couple of songs that I feel just more lend themselves to piano. Some of the songs Paul wrote, like Lady Madonna, Long and Winding Road. But even those songs you could credibly play on an acoustic guitar. So, I think the mark of a great song is that anybody can sing it, grab a guitar, grab a piano, whatever, sing it by themselves, and it still sounds good. It's a good song. In terms of, looking back on my own achievement, I'm proud of what I did. I think it's definitely not perfect. I mean, how could it be? I do make mistakes along the way in some of the songs I do. It would have taken me a lot longer if I had tried to perfect all the songs, whatever that means. If I had tried to play all the licks and everything, especially with some of the more complicated songs. So sometimes I just kind of let it go. Oh, did a couple of takes and all right, that's good enough. But I'm still proud of my efforts, and I think they're not bad. I don't think that there's any bad renditions. Some are better than others. I was just today going through and creating playlists of all the songs to to make albums that correspond with the original Beatles albums. But and so I was listening to myself, and some of the songs I was singing along and doing harmonies and saying to myself, maybe I should have done a harmony for this song when I recorded it. But it is fun to kind of sing along with your own voice, and if you're a singer, and harmonize with yourself. But yeah, I feel like I did a credible job of paying them the homage that they deserve as a non-professional musician who has a day job and who doesn't have time to get every little lick and riff down, and as somebody whose voice is somewhere between, I would say, John and Paul's range. I would say in terms of like my natural voice, it's a little closer to John. So I always feel more comfortable singing John songs. Feel that they're more in my range and that my voice kind of feels a little more John-like. But, I try to stretch and I try to get up to Paul's high vocal range, but it is hard. Sometimes I had to go down an octave. But I tried. Whenever I could, I tried to stay in the same key that they had originally sung the song. And that was a real challenge. You have to go up into falsetto, and then going back and forth between your natural voice and falsetto, there's going to be some awkward moments there for any singer, I think. So it really, it also brought home just the power of their voices, the amazing vocal range, their harmonies, and And just in closing, I feel like this is definitely a project. If you are a musician and you're a fan of the Beatles and know their music well, this is a good project to spend, 2 or 3 months on, just going through each song methodically. Whether you put them up on YouTube or just do it for your own sake, I think you learn so much as a musician by following the contours and the details of their songs. Um, and it's just one of many ways to appreciate their music and their legacy. Um, I I think that the Beatles' legacy goes way beyond the 200 songs that they wrote and made together as a band. I think you know I for one feel that so much of that creativity and the ideas and the musical education they received and all of their experience went into their post Beatles careers. And I think that in the future, maybe as historians of the Beatles and of popular music, we have to put more weight on their post Beatles careers, because not only did they continue to write great songs, but they also had an impact, had a social, cultural, political impact on the world, and I think that's why people still make movies about John, Paul, and George well after John and George's death, and a movie just came out about Paul's post Beatles career in the 70s and 80s, which I really look forward to watching. So I think this is just kind of the beginning in a way of their long and what's the word, successful careers as musicians. Whether or not what they did after the Beatles ever matched up to what they achieved as the Beatles is another question. And I am of the opinion that no matter how good their post-Beatles work was, this is their the best of the best. What's in this book? It's just it's a miracle that they were able to write these 200 amazing songs. There's not one bad, at least that's what I feel. There's not one bad song in the bunch. Even the songs on the White Album that a lot of people will pass over, I like and I appreciate. And I appreciated more after going through this book and replicating them and playing and singing songs that I'd never played before, right? So that's the other thing. So yeah, in closing, because I don't want to make this too long, I think it was a great project. I'm really grateful for, to the people who put together this book. I think it is the Bible for musicians who just want to pick up a guitar and play Beatles songs. Maybe not so much for piano, but I have another one for that. And I think that anybody who's a fan of the Beatles and is a guitar player and a singer ought to consider getting this book and think about making it a project. It'll take maybe a few months of your time, but it'll be well worth it. Cheers.